So for week 9, we're missing the RB1 Christian McCaffrey and the RB2 Travis Etienne. We'll also be missing the guy that was the RB7 prior to being injured in week 5, David Montgomery, the guy that's been the RB1 over the last 2 weeks, Jahmyr Gibbs, and the guy that was the RB9 last week, Javonte Williams. We are going to have some big shoes to fill this week, so lock it in for what may be the most important running back video that you watch this season. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? We are missing some top tier running back talent this week, but that doesn't mean that we don't have some guys that are going to be able to fill in and still help us on our way to a fantasy football victory in week 9. So make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here to the channel, turn on those bell notifications so you don't miss any of our content, and let's go ahead and lock it in for our week 9 running back start and sit analysis for every matchup in the NFL. Over his last 4 games, Derrick Henry has ran for over 100 yards twice and 97 yards in one of those other games. He's also been a top 10 running back twice and finishes the RB13 in one of those games as well. It seems to be that he's finally heating up, even if we're not seeing some of that ceiling that we're used to with him. And the move to Will Levis at quarterback may actually end up being a really big thing for Derrick Henry, because Levis is able to push the ball down the field way better than what Ryan Tannehill can, even if there's going to be a lot of inconsistencies that come with Will Levis becoming the starter, especially this week going up against Pittsburgh. But this Pittsburgh defense has allowed the 5th most rushing yards in the NFL so far, and the best way to offset a rookie quarterback is to make sure that you pound the football. I expect to see a really large workload on the ground with Derrick Henry this week. We'll probably see Tyjae Spears mix in a little bit as well. But if Tennessee can keep the game in a positive game script, which very well could happen not knowing the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh as of yet, Tyjae Spears probably would not see very many snaps because Derrick Henry will be running wild. Tennessee allows the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs right now, and Najee Harris just has not been able to get going. In fact, Harris only has 1 game inside the top 12 running backs this year. He has basically shown absolutely no ceiling for your fantasy team. And unfortunately for Jaylen Warren, over the last couple of weeks, we have really seen his target total decrease. He just isn't being looked at in the passing game as much as we would hope to. And now that Deontay Johnson is back and got 14 targets last week, for now we kind of have to slow up on Jaylen Warren until we see if Pittsburgh decides to get him going once again. Over the first 5 games of the season, the Kansas City Chiefs only allowed 2 opponents to run for more than 110 yards in a game. And now over the last 3 weeks, all of their opponents have run for more than 110 yards in each game, including Denver, who's done it twice now. So while Kansas City's run defense at one point in time was looking really tough to crack, Raheem Mostert could actually be in for some pretty decent upside this week. I would have to bet that Mike McDaniel is probably going to try and stay balanced at the beginning of this game. I doubt he wants to try and get into a shootout with Patrick Mahomes and have it be some sort of back and forth affair. If he's got to throw the ball, he's going to. But the more he can keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, probably the better. So Raheem Mostert at the beginning of the game should see a decent workload. Now, if Miami starts hitting some of those big home runs on the ground or through the air, then it could absolutely become the shootout that a lot of people would hope to see. So even if we do risk some floor with Raheem Mostert because of the potential shootout, his ability to hit a home run from anywhere on the field absolutely puts him with a high enough ceiling to offset that low floor. And for those of you that are going to ask in the comments, no, Jeff Wilson Jr. and Salvon Ahmed still are not worth starts. If one of them was banged up and there was only 1 RB2, then absolutely. But both of these guys are splitting RB2 snaps behind Raheem Mostert, who is firmly cemented as the starter right now. I saw a lot of frustrated comments with Isaiah Pacheco after their game this past week, but prior to week 8, he had logged 5 straight games of double-digit fantasy points. And you all just have to keep in mind that the game flow and game script was not what we anticipated, with Denver Denver taking an early lead and really shutting down the Kansas City offense the entire day, causing turnovers, and probably part of it had to do with Patrick Mahomes being under the weather, but make no excuses, Denver came to play and they absolutely killed all of Kansas City's fantasy value last week. Now, given the matchup and the fact that Miami does have the offensive prowess to absolutely put Kansas City in negative game script again, it is possible that we see some of that same risk with Isaiah Pacheco this week, where if the game remains close or Kansas City can take the lead and hold on to it, Pacheco should see upwards of 14 touches this week. But if for some reason Kansas City is down by maybe one or even multiple scores, Pacheco's going to lose some value at that point, and unfortunately, if he goes under 10 carries for the day, he just doesn't have close enough ceiling to be a really safe, risk-free start. Atlanta's defense has been pretty darn good this season, but they got smoked by Tennessee last week, allowing over 115 rushing yards for the first time since week 1, and allowing way too many big plays to Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins. But maybe that's just a blip on the radar, because their defense has been really, really good this season. And now they're going to be getting a Minnesota team who we don't even know is going to be the starter at quarterback. Kirk Cousins done for the year with a torn Achilles. Justin Jefferson still not close to returning. Their running game has been absolute garbage, and we just don't know what to expect. So Atlanta could be firmly in control with their defense in this game. And for that reason, I can't touch Alexander Mattison or Cam Akers. A lot of you might be thinking, but Kyle, won't they run the football more because of the fact that they aren't going to be that good passing the ball? They haven't been able to run the football all season with Kirk Cousins in a high-octane offense. What makes us think that all of a sudden with the change to a quarterback that we don't even know yet, all of a sudden their offense is going to get that much better on the ground? I'm not buying it. This is just one matchup that I want to stay away from. And if you're somebody out there that's missing multiple starters due to the bye weeks, I'm sorry to say, but you might just have to take the L this week at the RB position. After absolutely disappearing in week 7, almost literally given his usage, Bijan Robinson bounced back with a really nice game in week 8. Now, moving forward, I would love to list him as green again, but unfortunately at this point, I don't really think we could. Now, if he gets more consistent and Arthur Smith is more consistent with his game planning around Bijan Robinson, absolutely he could go back to green. But for right now, he's really going to be a guy that offers you a decent ceiling every single week, but we don't really know where his floor is going to be. Now, given this matchup, running the football against Minnesota, probably going to be the best thing, because I definitely could see a positive game script. And if Atlanta moves to Taylor Heinicke as the starter, they're probably not going to ask him to go out and throw the football 30 times in this game. Now, Minnesota's run defense has been pretty good this year, but Bijan Robinson still sees one of the highest percentages of route run of any running back in the NFL. So for me, I'll definitely still be running him out there this week, and he has top 10 potential, even if his floor has him just outside the top 12 running backs. If you're a Kenneth Walker owner, there's really no reason to freak out over Zach Charbonnet and his usage last week. Walker had been banged up for the entirety of the week, and going into that game, it was known that he could be limited in some capacity, and Charbonnet ended up seeing a higher workload, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's do everything that we can to keep Kenneth Walker healthy the rest of the season. And given the fact that this is going to be another tough matchup, it would not surprise me to see some of the same type of usage this week, even if Kenneth Walker does come back and probably take over 50% of the touches away from Zach Charbonnet. But keep in mind, prior to last week, Kenneth Walker was seeing over 90% of the running back snaps. That is absolutely insane usage. And we could even drop down a little bit from that and still have a great ceiling with Kenneth Walker every single week. Now again, this is a really tough matchup going up against Baltimore. Baltimore shellacked Detroit at home 2 weeks ago and absolutely could do the same thing to Seattle this week, which would put them in a negative game script and would keep Kenneth Walker potentially out of the game plan a little bit more than what we would like. I'm not worried about him moving forward, but I'm okay with him losing a few touches to Zach Charbonnet if it means keeping him healthy. And considering he's still banged up, he'll end up being in yellow for me this week. For as well as Gus Edwards has played the last couple of weeks, he absolutely deserves to be in green. But this is a Seattle defense that does allow the 8th fewest rushing yards in the NFL. So for me, his ceiling is still going to be somewhat capped this week, but his usage is super encouraging, especially for those of you that picked him up over the waiver wire and held on to him this entire time. It looks like he's finally fully healthy, feeling like his old self, and he's running like Gus Bus. He doesn't have a huge ceiling this week, but he should still have a pretty decent floor, especially if he scores a touchdown. As we continue to wait for James Conner to come back for Arizona, Emari Demercado has stepped in over the last couple of weeks and put together respectable numbers. And while a lot of you may have been grabbing him up off the waiver wire this week, this isn't really the matchup that you want to send him out in. The #1 overall defense that has allowed the 7th fewest rushing yards and the 10th fewest fantasy points to the running back position absolutely could shut down Demercado, and he would give you no ceiling whatsoever this week. Not only that, but it was announced that Joshua Dobbs will not be starting for the Arizona Cardinals this week. It would either be rookie Clayton Tune or it would end up being Kyler Murray back off the IR. With so much uncertainty going up against a really good defense, I have got to stay away from the running backs in Arizona this week. Arizona allows the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position, and they're currently ranked 26th against the run. And while it would be great to put both Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford in green this week, I just can't do it because Jerome Ford saw limited snaps in the first half last week. And even when he came in the second half, he didn't look great. He didn't look fully healthy as of yet. Pierre Strong, he saw quite a bit of snaps last week as well. So who's going to be the guy this week? Probably nobody, but Kareem Hunt gets the highest leverage touches at the running back position for Cleveland right now. If Cleveland makes it into the red zone, Kareem Hunt is the guy. He's seeing goal line carries and he's getting the workload that is allowing him to score touchdowns. Now, Jerome Ford, another week back from his ankle injury, hopefully will be a little bit better. And if he could play last week, I expect him to play this week. I would still see maybe Pierre Strong being worked in a little bit, but not really enough that I would want to sit Jerome Ford. But that's why they're in yellow this week, because there's no telling how the rotation will go, and there's no telling just how healthy Jerome Ford actually is. But both of these guys should still have a pretty decent floor. If you put them in your lineup expecting make maybe 8 to 10 fantasy points, you probably wouldn't be disappointed. But I don't know how high their ceiling could actually go. Even though Royce Freeman scored a touchdown this past week, over the last couple of weeks, a majority of the workload has gone to Darrell Henderson. And he hasn't been super efficient, but the dude hasn't been playing football either. Royce Freeman's been on the Rams all season long, and yet he wasn't getting any running back touches, and Darrell Henderson was still given the shot over him 2 weeks ago. So am I willing to just run out and say Royce Freeman is the RB1? Probably not. For me personally, Darrell Henderson will still be the guy this week. And you also have to keep in mind that because of the game script where LA went down big and they went down big early, Royce Freeman was utilized maybe a little bit more than Darrell Henderson. But that's all right. This week, going up against Green Bay, this is a really good matchup for Darrell Henderson and maybe some risky upside with Royce Freeman if you're looking for someone to start. Green Bay allows the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position, and their defense currently ranks 27th against the run right now. They're having issues with the running back position. Also add into the fact that we don't know Matthew Stafford's status as of right now. Even if he does play this week, how healthy is he actually going to be? Is it going to be the backup quarterback coming in? If that's the case, whatever it may be, whether it's Stafford or somebody else, I would expect the Rams to try and utilize their running backs. And I think Henderson and Freeman could both have fantasy upside this week. If I had to take a guess, Henderson would be the safer of the two. That's why he's in green. And Royce Freeman would be a little bit more risky. That's why he's in yellow, but would have more upside. The Rams' run defense has dropped a little bit in the standings over the last couple of weeks, but it wasn't really due to their performance. It was more along the lines due to other teams just playing a little bit better than them and kind of jumping them in the standings. The LA Rams defense is still doing a really good job of shutting down opposing running backs. Right now, they have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. And given the state of the running backs in Green Bay right now, it is really tough to trust either of them. Now, Aaron Jones is going to make his way into yellow because we're going to see him probably get a little bit of a larger workload this week as they work to increase his workload, coming back from the hamstring injury, but he's also way more dynamic in the passing game than what A.J. Dillon is. So for me, if I had to start one of these guys, it would absolutely be Aaron Jones. He has way more upside than A.J. Dillon has. Even though both of them have really sucky floors this week, Aaron Jones is a guy that if you own, you're probably not in a position where you would have to sit him anyway. All right, so I've been halfway right about Rachaad White, because he still sucks on the ground. He's only averaging 3.3 yards per carry right now. He's giving you no upside on the ground whatsoever. But if you drafted him, you're being bailed out right now by the fact that they have increased his workload in the passing game each of the last 2 weeks. After only averaging just over 3 targets per game the first 6 weeks of the season, over the last 2 weeks, Rachaad White has seen a huge jump in that, with 13 total targets in week 7 and 8. And because of that, he's gone from averaging about 23 receiving yards per game to over 65 receiving yards the last 2 games. Keep an eye on that situation. In half PPR and PPR leagues, that absolutely makes Rachaad White way more valuable than he was to begin the season. But when you've got guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, how often will those targets keep up? It's something to just keep an eye on. Rachaad White, for me, will get a little bit of a jump in my rankings, though, this week, now that I've seen that consistent usage in the passing game. But just know, if that usage disappears, the bottom absolutely falls out, and Rachaad White is not even a top 25 running back without it. In fact, he's starting to remind me a lot of another White, James White. He may eventually become a guy where they look at and say, hey, in the passing game, that's great, but you're going to lose your touches on the ground. And if that happens, we're going to have to be really careful with how the usage plays moving forward. The Tampa Bay defense is ranked 10th against the run right now, and they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. And given the state of the Houston backfield, neither of these guys are going to be worth a start this week. Dameon Pierce had the absolute matchup last week to finally break through and show that upside that we saw from him in 2022, and he just couldn't get the job done. Devin Singletary is right behind him, and he's wanting to take that starting job, and it could very well happen. And when it does, Devin Singletary may become a fantasy starter for us. But in this matchup, this week, neither of them are going to be worth it. Washington's usage of Brian Robinson continues to be a mystery to me, because to begin the season, he was going off, getting a ton of volume and looking really, really good. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems like it's pulling teeth to get Washington to give him 10 carries a game. In fact, over the last few weeks, he had a couple of great matchups against poor run defenses, and Washington decided to come out and throw the ball all over the place. They put themselves in a negative game script, and then he didn't get nearly as many carries as we would have hoped. And then this past week against Philadelphia, they were actually in positive game script. Brian Robinson was averaging 5.9 yards per carry, and Washington just wanted to keep throwing the football instead of trying to control it a little bit more, and Brian Robinson only ended with 10 carries, and Washington lost the game. I'm not exactly sure what their game plan is with him right now. Now, New England allows the 9th fewest rushing yards right now. And really, Brian Robinson would need to get his work in the passing game this week. And it's not inconceivable that he does that, because he has offered some upside in the passing game with a couple of receiving touchdowns this season. Now, is it consistent work? Absolutely not. Really, for this week, I would be hoping for about 10 carries on the ground, give me 40 to 50 yards, and then maybe a few catches as well. And the hopes is he finds the end zone, whether it be on the ground or through the air. But if Washington can put together a decent lead against New England, I really hope that they would work to try and get Brian Robinson at least 15 carries this week. For as confusing as Washington has been with Brian Robinson, New England has been 10 times worse with Rhamondre Stevenson. It's like Bill Belichick just doesn't want to give him any type of touches. The dude exploded last season. He was the clear-cut RB1. He was doing great work in the passing game. And even this past week, we saw some of that explosiveness from last year that we hadn't seen this year. But they can't block on the offensive line. They can't run block on the offensive line. Mac Jones continues to have really poor turnovers. And again, I really don't know why they wait until the end of the game to give Rhamondre Stevenson several targets. At this point, unfortunately, Stevenson really, for the majority of us that have the depth, needs to go to the bench. Now, if you need to play him this week, I just wouldn't anticipate a lot of upside, and my hope would be that he gives me like 6 or 7 fantasy points. D'Onta Foreman won your week a couple of weeks ago if you started him, but this past week, it was absolutely a worse matchup. And now we get an even worse matchup going up against New Orleans defense. D'Onta Foreman has absolutely no ceiling for me this week. If you're looking for anybody to try and help out, I do believe that Roschon Johnson will be a better bet, because I can't imagine that Chicago will be in any type of a positive game script in this matchup, which would hope that Roschon Johnson will see a few dump offs. Now, D'Onta Foreman, he may be, if Chicago can get into the red zone and if they can get near the goal line, maybe he scores a touchdown, but I can't really see the guy going for more than 50 rushing yards on the ground. I mean, last week, the dude only got 10 carries and a negative game script. Against New Orleans, it would probably be the same thing. And again, my hope is that Roschon Johnson, now a week removed from returning from that concussion, sees a little bit of a bump up in his workload and in the passing game, could help in half PPR or PPR formats. This has to be one of the largest discrepancies that I see in run defenses right now in the NFL, because the Chicago Bears allow the 7th most fantasy points to the running back position, but they allow the 3rd fewest rushing yards in the NFL. And Alvin Kamara is on absolute fire right now, but we might see some similar usage to what we saw last week from Austin Ekeler, because Austin Ekeler destroyed Chicago through the air. And if you remember earlier in the year, Aaron Jones destroyed Chicago through the air. Chicago can't stop running backs in the passing game. They have allowed the most receiving yards and the most receiving touchdowns to running backs in the NFL so far this year. So over on Underdog right now, Alvin Kamara's line is currently set at 60.5 rushing yards. And going up against Chicago, you might be tempted to take the over there. But again, given the usage that we saw from Austin Ekeler, how well Chicago does against the run, and the fact that Kamara has been tearing it up in the passing game, I'm actually going to go lower on that line. Don't forget, if you're wanting to play any of the pick'ems that we talk about throughout the week or on Sunday mornings, make sure you head on over to Underdog and sign up with code word headliners. When you deposit at least $10, Underdog is going to match your deposit all the way up to $100, and they're going to give you a special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit. And again, a lot of you may be tempted to take the over on Kamara this week, and I absolutely understand why. But I would not be surprised either if we didn't see this line drop a little bit throughout the week. So I'm going to take advantage of where it's currently at. Jonathan Taylor was killing it in the first half on Sunday, and then all of a sudden in the second half completely disappeared for Zach Moss. Now, he might be dealing with a little bit of an ankle issue right now and may be a little bit banged up. But this is such a good matchup this week against Carolina that you could probably start both Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss and get more than enough fantasy points from both of them. But keep an eye on it. If for some reason Jonathan Taylor ends up being limited or misses this week, that could send Zach Moss way up the rankings. But for now, both of them have pretty safe floors, and depending on if they score a touchdown, could have a nice ceiling as well. Indianapolis's defense continues a downward trend, and going up against Carolina this week could be an opportunity for them to get back on track. But I actually think Chuba Hubbard could end up being a safe start this week for you. The Colts are allowing a ton of fantasy points to running backs right now, and Chuba Hubbard was absolutely the main running back last week as Miles Sanders barely even outtouched Blackshear in this offense. So if you're looking for a bye week fill-in, Chuba Hubbard could end up being the perfect option for you. Maybe not the highest ceiling in the world given the fact that Carolina could be trailing, but I would give him a pretty decent floor because he should get some work in the passing game as well. Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs could both have a plus matchup for you this week, right when you need it most. And for Saquon Barkley, he's got himself a really great opportunity because he should see a ton of volume, given the fact that we don't know what's going on with the quarterback situation in New York right now. It is conceivable that Saquon Barkley could see upwards of 30 touches this week in this game. And that would be plenty to put him as a top 5 play going up against a Las Vegas defense that just got absolutely worked on the ground and through the air by Jahmyr Gibbs and the Detroit Lions. Josh Jacobs has a great opportunity to finally see his ceiling in this matchup against the New York Giants. He looked pretty good against Detroit on Monday Night Football. He looked explosive at times, and he even found the end zone. He looked a lot better than he has a lot of other times so far this year. And going up against New York, this is the perfect opportunity for Las Vegas to run into them, knowing the fact that they're banged up at the quarterback position, because it could allow them, for the first time in a while, to have a positive game script and allow Josh Jacobs to just control the game on the ground. For Barkley and Jacobs both, they have great top 10 potential in this matchup. Let's just hope that the coaches don't overthink it and just pound the football in this game. Man, Tony Pollard has been a huge disappointment so far this season, and now he gets the #1 ranked defense in all of football on the ground, both in terms of rushing yards allowed and fantasy points to the running back position. For Tony Pollard, he is going to have to make his points in the passing game this week, but he really hasn't been looked at in the passing game. We'll see if the Cowboys try to change some things up a little bit and give him some of those looks out of the backfield through the air. But if a majority of his touches are just going to be on the ground and he's running into a really good defensive line, Pollard is going to have an absolutely trashy floor this week. DeAndre Swift's first 2 starts in week 2 and 3 had it appeared that he could be in for a top 5 fantasy season, but he's lost a lot of that ceiling over the last few weeks. The good news is he's still averaging 18 touches per game. So even though some of those huge plays have not come back as of yet, he also hasn't lost a ton of that ceiling because he's getting a lot of touches. He's also finding ways to score. So in this matchup where it might be a little bit tougher to run the football, let's just hope that he sees a few more passes through the air, a few more targets. And it doesn't matter if he reaches the end zone on the ground because Philly is in the red zone, or if he's able to catch a pass out of the backfield and score that way. Because of the amount of volume he's getting and the offense that he plays in, even if his upside has not been there, he's still a very, very safe play. So I know a lot of people are going to be asking about Leonard Fournette, and we are in week 9 of the NFL season. Do we really think that Leonard Fournette is going to walk in off the street and become the starter in Buffalo? Absolutely not. More than likely, they're just looking to reinforce their running backs right now. And James Cook is getting a lot of hate from people because he's not giving you the fantasy upside that you would have hoped for. But he's not having a bad season. It's absolutely crazy the amount of hate I see James Cook getting right now, saying that he's not that good of a running back and that Leonard Fournette should just replace him. Because from a football standpoint, he's playing pretty darn well. He's still averaging 15 touches per game, and he's still averaging over 80 total yards per game. In fact, even though he's averaging 3 less touches per game than DeAndre Swift, he's averaging only 4 less yards per game than DeAndre Swift. So again, From a football standpoint, James Cook has played just fine this year. You're just upset because he's not scoring a ton of touchdowns, and Latavius Murray is still seeing a lot of snaps right now as well. But you drafted this guy as like your RB3, and all of a sudden you're expecting way more out of him. James Cook, you can still flex right now. And the Cincinnati Bengals allow the 4th most rushing yards in football, so it's absolutely a possibility that we could see James Cook go for 60, 70, 80 yards again, potentially offer you a couple of receptions as well, and be right around that 10 fantasy point mark. Now, if he scores a touchdown, it goes a lot higher than that. But once again, there's no way in the world that Leonard Fournette, who signs on Monday, is going to walk in after not playing a snap the first 8 weeks of the NFL season and just take over as a starter. Me personally, I would still be willing to try and add James Cook to my roster as bench depth, because I really don't think Leonard Fournette is just going to take a ton of touches from him. It's something that we'll definitely monitor, but if somebody owns James Cook and is super freaked out about Leonard Fournette right now, you could probably get him for close to nothing. Joe Mixon had a really nice game this past week, his best game of the season so far, and now he's getting a Buffalo defense that's had some trouble stopping running backs on the ground. He still doesn't have a huge ceiling for me, because like I have explained for weeks right now, he just doesn't carry the ceiling in this offense that we would have hoped for, but he's carried a pretty decent floor all year long. When you've started Joe Mixon, you knew what you were going to get, and you drafted him as like your RB2 or RB3 anyway. So even with that being said, you're probably not expecting him to win every single week for you, but he's giving you consistent fantasy points. And then when he has a big week like he did last week, it's basically icing on the cake. He could have another one of those weeks where he has a safe floor, so we're going to start him, and then all of a sudden, maybe he scores a touchdown and he reaches the ceiling that we love to see. Monday Night Football is also going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Gentlemen, November is here, which means it is No Shave November, but you don't want that nasty looking beard hanging all over the place. Even though we're not shaving, we still got to keep it sleek and clean. And Manscaped has a ton of beard products on their website now that you can use to really kick off No Shave November in style. Make sure you use code word headliners at checkout. You're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. The Jets have the 2nd worst run defense in all of football right now. And the Los Angeles Chargers allow the 6th fewest rushing yards, but the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. And Austin Eckler and Breece Hall are as dynamic as they come on the ground and through the air. And that's why this matchup on Monday Night Football is going to be a ton of fun to watch. Because even if Breece Hall does get stuck on the ground a little bit, we know he can score through the air at ease. And he should still see a decent amount of targets in this matchup, given the fact that the Jets should know going into this that the Chargers have a lot of issues stopping running backs through the air. And for Austin Eckler, this would be a great opportunity to get him going on the ground again. We saw that upside last week in the passing game, and some of that should continue into this game as well. But if the Chargers can get themselves into a positive game script, which is definitely feasible going up against the Jets, then you find yourself in a situation where you can run Austin Eckler a little bit more, and hopefully that efficiency comes with it. But even if we find ourselves in some sort of weird gameplay here where it's a defensive battle, both of these running backs should see enough of upside through the passing game to warrant a really safe start for all of their fantasy owners. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it, my start and sit analysis for every matchup week 9 of the NFL. We're missing some true gamers this week at the running back position, but hopefully you have set your roster up for success. And this is one of the reasons why we say it's so important to have running back depth, because if you do, you're able to easily cover yourself this week and hopefully get a fantasy win because of that. So before you get out of here, hit that like button for me, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and make sure you turn on those bell notifications so anytime we go live or drop new content, you're gonna know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.